Handsome doesn't even begin to cover it. These men were born from the bloodlines of the most irresistible icons in R&B history. Charm wasn't learned, it was inherited. The killer smiles. The plush, seductive lips. One look is all it takes to make you blush, send your heart into overdrive, and keep you dreaming long after the lights go out. One of them was once dubbed a walking, talking chocolate bar by the press. Another was so devastatingly attractive that directors struggled to finish scenes. Cameras literally shook every time he stepped into the frame. This isn't just a list of famous sons. This is a golden lineup of beauty so powerful, even time itself looks on with envy. So brace yourself as we step into the world of 21 Black Gods, the sons of the most handsome R&B legends to ever touch a microphone. Ray Charles Robinson Jr. The name alone carries a certain gravity. The son of the immortal Ray Charles, Ray Jr. inherited far more than a famous last name. He inherited presence. Ray Charles Robinson Jr. is a rare kind of force, quiet, controlled, and magnetic. He didn't need to announce himself. He didn't need noise. With sharp, thoughtful eyes, a sculpted jawline, a strong nose, and an effortless, old-school elegance, he looked less like a modern celebrity and more like a classic 1950s film star who had somehow stepped off the silver screen and into real life. When Ray Jr. entered a room, conversations softened. Eyes turned. The air shifted. Beyond his striking appearance, Ray Jr. carved his own path as a film producer and author. In his memoir, You Don't Know Me, Reflections of My Father, Ray Charles, he courageously explored the brilliance, the shadows, and the private pain behind his father's legendary life, revealing the man behind the music with honesty and restraint. But it was at the book launch in 2002 that something unexpected unfolded. Ray Jr. stepped onto the stage wearing a classic gray suit, crisp white shirt, and black tie, simple, timeless, devastatingly elegant. One elderly female journalist later recalled, "When he smiled, it felt like I was seeing Ray Charles reborn, not the sorrow and darkness, but a younger, sharper light, shining like a spotlight." Another woman, well into her 60s, quietly admitted, "I loved his father for the music. But I love his son for the way he looks at me." That very evening, a renowned photographer who had worked with Time magazine invited Ray Jr. to sit for a portrait series titled Shadow of a Legacy. Yet every photograph seemed to carry something more, an unexplainable energy, as if Ray Jr. was not just standing in history's shadow, but extending its beauty forward. In a world where new faces constantly compete for attention, we often forget that true beauty never shouts. It simply exists. One look, deep enough, is all it takes to stay with you forever. Ray Charles Robinson Jr. is living proof of that truth. Some beauty doesn't fade with time. It waits for the right moment. And when it appears, your heart reacts the same way it did the first time you heard his father's piano echo through a room, soft, powerful, unforgettable. If you ever loved R&B in its golden age, let Ray Jr.'s eyes guide you back there, to the most beautiful place your soul has ever known. Sam Cooke Jr., the quiet poet with a smile. Some people enter a room and command attention not with noise, not with scandal, but with something far rarer, a gentle gravity that draws others in without effort. Sam Cooke Jr., the son of soul legend Sam Cooke, is exactly that kind of presence. Born after his father's tragic death, Sam Jr. grew up beneath a shadow too vast, too legendary to escape. Yet he never tried to compete with it. He chose a different road, soft-spoken, grounded, working behind the scenes in event organization and entertainment logistics, far from the spotlight. But beauty like his never stays hidden for long. In 1998, at a fashion fitting where he had gone only as a substitute for his sister, everything changed. When Sam Jr. stepped into the room, a renowned black designer turned, paused, studied him in silence, then asked simply, "Have you ever thought about modeling?" Sam Jr. smiled, tilted his head just slightly, and the room froze. Warm brown skin smooth as velvet. A straight, sculpted nose. Gentle eyes that held kindness, not vanity. A smile that made you want to hear him recite poetry, tell love stories, or describe a quiet afternoon rain. The moment traveled fast. A young photographer discreetly captured Sam Jr. smiling with sunlight pouring in behind him. That photograph still hangs in a Chicago community art gallery, titled, "The Soulful Smile of Sam Cooke." A female artist once said, "I used to dream Sam Cooke sang to me in my sleep. But his son's smile woke me up, and I was still dreaming." Sam Cooke Jr. never made music. He never stood on stage. Yet his presence reminds us that some legacies don't need to be sung. They only need to be lived, in the way someone walks, laughs softly, or looks at you as if they've known you from another lifetime. And if you've ever cried listening to You Send Me, believe this, Sam Jr.'s gentle smile can send you too, drifting back to the most beautiful memory of your first love. James Joseph Brown II. James Joseph Brown II, the ruler of untamed beauty. If James Brown was the king of soul, then James Brown II was the prince of the American South's raw, feral allure. He never had to try to stand out. Simply existing was enough. A sharp, unblinking stare. Wild curls that echoed his father's golden era. The kind of presence that made it impossible to look away. His body was lean and coiled with purpose, his stride deliberate, his voice deep and carrying the dust and heat of old Georgia. James Brown II was never just a shadow of a legend. He was a living emblem of old-school masculinity, unapologetic, grounded, dangerous in its silence. As the youngest son of James Brown, he first drew media attention during a television program on Black cultural heritage in Atlanta. But it wasn't until 2018, at a memorial concert honoring his father, that people truly grasped the force of his presence. That night, James walked on stage in a black leather jacket, skinny jeans, and high boots, like a warrior pulled straight from the 1970s. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He simply bowed his head. And when the lights caught his eyes, those eyes, often compared to James Brown's legendary laser glare, the room went still. Time hesitated. A female guest singer, nearly 20 years older, whispered backstage, "If James Brown is the drum, then his son is the fire burning on its skin, wild, hot, and charged with pure sexual power." A local reporter wrote, "He doesn't walk onto the stage, he takes it. No one dares speak loudly when his gaze drops over the front row." James Brown too may not sing or dance like his father, but he embodies what the world once worshipped about James Brown: the command of a leader, the fury of a man who refuses to shrink, the beauty that both intoxicates and intimidates. He feels like a warrior god born from soul music itself. No melody required. His presence alone dominates the heart. And in that moment, you realize some people aren't born to perform. They're born to be watched, remembered, etched permanently into the private mythology of desire. James Brown too is that kind of memory, a living symbol that makes you ache to live wilder, truer, more instinctively beautiful. 18. Joe Tex II, the wanderer carried by the soul music wind. Joe Tex was once a phenomenon, but his son Joe Tex II moves people in an entirely different way. Not loud, not rebellious. Yet every time he appears, the room seems to cool and narrow until all attention settles on him alone. His sharp, southern features carry quiet confidence. His half-smile feels like an invitation. His eyes are calm, but there's something flickering inside them, something that makes you curious and suddenly shy. He is beauty without excess, presence without performance. Despite keeping a low profile, Joe Tex II caused a quiet stir when he made a surprise appearance at the Soul Awards in New Orleans in 2014. No one expected him. But the moment he walked in, white linen shirt, khakis, classic leather shoes, people turned around twice, unsure if they'd just seen Joe Tex resurrected in a younger body. A veteran musician who once played with Joe Tex said, "I looked at him and got chills. The laugh, the way he slipped his hands into his pockets, it was his father. But there was something else too. A soft sadness. Like a character pulled from a James Baldwin short story." A female stage manager later confessed, "I forgot to hand the mic to the MC because I was too busy watching Joe II smile. He reminded me of the first man who ever made me lose sleep." Joe Tex II's charm doesn't live in his music, it lives in how he exists. He never tries to stand out. His simplicity is the magnet. He's like a ribbon of cigarette smoke drifting through a quiet afternoon, an old soul record playing softly enough to make you stop, remember, and feel. Joe Tex 2 is an unfinished verse of an unfinished love song, a modern soul wanderer who doesn't need rebellion to drive people mad. He leaves you wondering what truly makes a man unforgettable. Maybe it's honest beauty mixed with nameless memories. Just as Joe Tex once made hearts flutter, his son now makes them ache, more gently, but just as deeply. Jackie Wilson Jr., the man whose eyes could silence a room. Jackie Wilson was once crowned Mr. Excitement, a whirlwind of sound and motion. But his son, Jackie Wilson Jr., represents an entirely different kind of allure. He doesn't dance like his father. He doesn't shout to ignite a crowd. He doesn't have to. The moment he steps into view, tall frame, luminous face, eyes full of quiet mystery, and a soft smile that feels lifted straight from a 1960s romance novel, the room shifts. Jackie Jr. makes middle-aged women pause and think, is this the man I once dreamed of? For most of his life, Jackie Jr. chose the shadows, dedicating himself to protecting and honoring his father's musical legacy while keeping his own life private. Then, in 2012, during an event celebrating Motown legends in Detroit, he unexpectedly appeared on stage as the Wilson family's representative. What people remember from that night isn't what he said, it's how he appeared. He simply opened the door and walked slowly toward the podium. Instantly, every camera locked onto him. A veteran journalist in the front row later recalled, "The woman next to me grabbed her husband's arm the second Jackie Jr. looked down and smiled." A female guest singer confessed after the show, "He barely speaks, but when he looks at you, it feels like you're melting, like his eyes see straight through your heart." His beauty isn't loud. It doesn't beg for attention. It's deep, restrained, and quietly powerful. A kind of charm that's hard to define, much like his father's in his youth. Yet Jackie Jr. adds something new, the magnetism of a man who has lived, who understands silence, who knows exactly when not to speak, and how to leave an imprint that lasts a lifetime. He isn't a singer, yet whenever he appears, it feels like a familiar melody fills the air, one no one dares to interrupt. He is a living symbol of timeless beauty, untouched by stage lights, yet capable of making hearts flutter the way they did the first time Jackie Wilson sang Lonely Teardrops. In a world that moves too fast, Jackie Wilson Jr. is a gentle reminder that some people don't need to shine. They simply need to be present, to pull you back to a time you thought was lost, and to remind you of a love so pure it makes you wish, just for a moment, that you were young enough to feel it all over again. Eddie Kendricks Jr., the man who carries sadness the way Motown carried love. Eddie Kendricks Jr. doesn't need mirrors to see his father. The legendary Temptations tenor lives on in the depth of his gaze, that quiet, aching look that stops people mid-thought. More than once, whispers ripple through a crowd. That's Eddie Kendricks, alive again. If his father was the sweet, soaring voice that defined an era, then Eddie Jr. is something rarer, a living echo, a beauty shaped by sorrow. His sadness is elegant, wrapped in tailored suits and measured silence, the kind that makes people stare without knowing why. He lives privately, almost invisibly, rarely stepping into the public eye. Then came 2019, at a Motown Legacy celebration in Detroit. Eddie Jr. surprised everyone by accepting the invitation. When he entered the hall, it felt as if he'd stepped in from another world. Dark blue velvet suit, crisp white shirt open at the collar, hair perfectly cut, eyes carrying decades of music and memory. A documentary producer later said, "I was mid-sentence and just stopped." The room felt different when Eddie Jr. walked in. "I've never seen someone so sad and so beautiful." When he spoke, he didn't say much. He shared only one small moment, seeing his father alone behind the stage, wiping sweat from his face, whispering, "Music makes my heart tired." Spoken in Eddie Jr.'s deep, steady voice, the words broke something open in the room. People cried. After the event, letters poured in. Older fans wrote the organizers just to ask, who was the man with the sad eyes? One woman confessed, "I fell in love with Eddie Kendricks in 1965, but tonight his son stole my heart." Not because he sang, but because his silence spoke louder than music ever could. Eddie Kendricks Jr. never lived like a star. He lived like the unfinished final chapter of a book called The Temptations. He didn't need to sing. Every step, every glance, every unhurried movement felt like a wordless soul song, for those who loved deeply, lost painfully, and never fully healed. That's why people didn't just admire Eddie Jr., they recognized themselves in him. A man who chose quiet over applause, honored his legacy with grace, and carried the enduring beauty of Motown in every breath. Howard Tate Jr., the kind of man whose presence makes you feel like you could talk to him for a lifetime. While his father, Howard Tate, was one of the most underrated soul voices of the 1960s, few could have imagined that his son would become a quiet embodiment of timeless beauty and rare depth. Soft-spoken and unassuming, Howard Jr. carries himself like a gentleman pulled from the pages of an old novel. Deep, attentive eyes. A warm, steady voice. An aura that invites you to sit down, breathe, and open up without fear. He didn't follow his father into music, but instead chose a different path of influence, through social work and education, devoting his life to lifting others. In 2013, he received the Voice of Change Award for his dedication to underserved Black youth in Philadelphia. Yet it wasn't until a 2017 fundraising evening at the Black Excellence Museum of Art that people truly understood the depth of his impact. When Howard Jr. walked into the auditorium, few noticed him at first. But after only a handful of words, the room fell into a heavy, reverent silence. A former high school teacher whispered, "I've never met someone who made me want to learn, and also want to hold hands and walk through life right then and there." A young model hosting the event broke into tears as Howard Jr. spoke about his father's sacrifices. "He was a voice the world forgot," he said, "but he never made me feel unheard." Howard Jr.'s beauty was never about clothing or spotlight. It lived in the way he looked at people, as if you could confess your darkest truths and still be seen as worthy of love. An Essence magazine reporter once wrote, "When Howard Jr. enters a room, women fall silent, not because of his looks, but because his energy restores faith that good men still exist." Howard Tate Jr. doesn't need fame to move hearts. He simply shows up, quietly, deeply, and reminds us that real beauty isn't makeup or perfection, but the rare ability to make someone feel truly seen. And sometimes, what makes us want to live beautifully isn't a revolution, but a calm gaze that reaches straight into the soul. Marvin Gaye III, the quiet echo of a legend. Carrying a name that weighs as much as history itself is never easy. As the adopted son of Marvin Gaye, Marvin III lives in the long, delicate shadow of a voice that changed music forever. Yet the moment you see him, you understand why admirers of his father instinctively stop and stare. He doesn't need tailored suits or careful styling. With his naturally curly hair, eyes that seem to hold unspoken sorrow, and a smile that feels as if it might vanish at any second, he carries an effortless gravity. Looking at him is like hearing Marvin Gaye on the radio during a lonely winter afternoon, warm, aching, and unforgettable, then suddenly realizing that memory has stepped into the room. Marvin III once worked in the entertainment industry and released the album Can't Take My Eyes Off You in 2013, but the moment that truly captured the public wasn't on a stage. It was at the 30th anniversary memorial of Marvin Gaye's death in Los Angeles. When Marvin III rose to speak, a soft light fell across his face, and the room fell silent. A female singer who had worked with Marvin Gaye in his final years began to cry, whispering that it felt like seeing Marvin again, gentler, less wounded, yet still just as magical. An elderly man in the audience said Marvin III didn't need to sing. Just standing there was enough. In that moment, everyone saw Marvin once more, not through sound, but through light. There is something about Marvin Gaye III that draws you closer while urging you to keep your distance, as if getting too near might shatter something sacred. His beauty isn't deliberate, yet it pulls you toward unnamed emotional depths. He's like a love song you're afraid to hear twice, fearing you'll love too deeply, miss too much, and struggle to return to reality. Marvin Gaye III proves that a gaze that knows how to listen, and a smile that knows when to step back, can reach deeper than any melody. He doesn't exist to command attention, but his presence alone makes any space softer, richer, and unforgettable. And sometimes, living beautifully doesn't require grandeur at all. It only requires knowing how to smile from the heart, the way Marvin III still does. Solomon Burke Jr. Solomon Burke Jr. was the man who carried a father's soul in his eyes. While Solomon Burke was crowned the king of rock and soul, a towering legend whose throne stood center stage, it was his son who embodied the quiet tenderness of that royal bloodline. With a full, steady presence, a gentle face, an easy smile, and eyes that invited confession, Solomon Jr. made people feel seen without ever saying a word. He didn't need fame to make others feel loved. Choosing a different path from his iconic father, he stepped away from the spotlight and became a producer and theater director, working behind the scenes to create memorial programs and uplifting art performances across the United States. The night that defined him most came in 2011 at Solomon Burke's memorial service at Greater Bethany Community Church in Los Angeles. As the room sat heavy with silence, the doors slowly opened and Solomon Jr. entered in a black suit, head bowed. When he finally looked up, the air changed. The crowd fell still, not because he resembled his father, but because of the look in his eyes. It said, "I know you're hurting. I'm hurting too. But we'll be okay," one witness recalled. An elderly woman, a lifelong fan, broke down in tears. "I saw my father come back to life," she said, "not through his voice, but through his love." Few photos were taken that night, but one image traveled far. Solomon Jr. standing at the altar, soft light resting on his face, radiating forgiveness, gentleness, and quiet strength, like a father blessing weary souls without speaking. He was the kind of man who could soften your heart in minutes, who never had to prove who he was. Solomon Burke Jr. existed like a living ballad, low, deep, and healing. And in a world obsessed with the spotlight, he reminds us that sometimes a single look, offered at the right moment, can change how people love, how they grieve, and how they choose to live, just as his father once did, but in a quieter, more tender language. Percy Sledge Jr. Percy Sledge Jr. is the kind of man who moves hearts without ever raising his voice. If Percy Sledge once shook the world with "When a Man Loves a Woman," his son touches people in a quieter, deeper way, through sincerity that doesn't need music to be felt. No grand stage. No roaring applause. Just a steady presence, honest eyes, and a soft, restrained smile. Percy Jr. carries the calm strength of a real man, the kind middle-aged women feel safe standing beside, and the kind other men quietly aspire to become. He lives a simple life in Alabama, on the same land where his grandfather built the family's first home. He works behind the scenes in small music events, often hosting local community gatherings that honor classic soul, songs that still breathe, still ache, still heal. For years, he stayed far from the spotlight, until 2016. That year, at the dedication of a new performance hall in Mobile named after his late father, Percy Jr. was asked to speak. He stepped onto the stage with reddened eyes, but he didn't cry. He paused, silent, grounded, for a few seconds, then said quietly, "I can't sing like my dad. But if I had to choose between standing up and singing, or holding someone's hand while they're grieving, I'd choose the latter." The room fell still. Later, a woman in her 60s, a lifelong fan of Percy Sledge, said, "I can't stop thinking about him. Not because of his looks, though he was strikingly handsome, but because I saw something in him that music is missing today, authenticity." And she was right. Percy Sledge Jr. is not a spark that flashes and fades. He's a slow burn, the kind that warms your heart through the longest winter. The kind of soul that doesn't need a microphone to be heard. The kind of presence that, with just a look, makes you want to release your anger and breathe again. Percy Jr. reminds us that some forms of beauty make no noise at all. They exist quietly, to comfort, to steady us, to restore our faith in kindness. And if a man can make you smile without saying a word, perhaps that is one of life's rarest gifts. You've walked with us through the first 10 names, 10 children who carry within them the grace and spirit of an entire culture. But brace your heart, because what comes next may stir emotions you're not ready for. Maybe now is the moment to ask ourselves, do we love them for who they truly are, or simply because of the names they carry? Tell me, should a name decide a person's charm? Smokey Robinson Jr. Smokey Robinson Jr., the living echo of a love song. His father, Smokey Robinson, was the very symbol of romance in Motown music, a voice that taught the world how love should sound. And somehow, Smokey Jr. seems to have stepped straight out of those timeless melodies. He inherited not only his father's expressive eyes and smooth, honeyed presence, but also a kind of romantic beauty that feels almost unreal. People don't just want to look at him, they want to listen. His voice, light as a breeze yet warm as velvet, has a way of silencing an entire room. At a charity fundraiser in Detroit in 2014, Smokey Jr. appeared without announcement. He wore a light blue suit, a crisp white shirt, his hair gently parted to the side, just the way his father once wore it. When he walked onto the stage to give his acceptance speech, a middle-aged woman clutched her friend's hand and whispered, "I can't breathe. He looks so much like Smokey, I feel like I'm back in 1967. When he smiled, the way the lights danced in his eyes brought tears to the audience, not because of celebrity, but because of the sudden return of a time when music touched hearts with pure honesty. Smokey Jr. never chose to become a star. Yet every time he enters a room, he carries a gentle presence with him, making those who loved his father feel loved all over again. He reminds us that some beauty is never truly lost, that sometimes all it takes is a smile, a glance at the right moment, for the past to come alive again in a way that feels heartbreakingly perfect. Wilson Pickett Jr. Wilson Pickett Jr. is the bad boy who still breathes rock and soul. His father, Wilson Pickett, was a musical whirlwind of his generation, but his son is a quieter storm, one that hits without warning. With fiery eyes, a strong, unmistakable nose, and a raw, unpolished presence, he makes hearts race the moment he enters a room. He embodies the kind of danger people admire, fear, and can't stop staring at. He doesn't need a microphone or a spotlight. Just standing there, arms crossed, leaning against a doorway, he turns the room into a living 1970s rock and soul music video. In 2017, at a street music festival in Nashville, Pickett Jr. stepped forward to accept a memorial award honoring his father. He wore a black t-shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed boots. But it wasn't the clothes that silenced the crowd, it was the way he walked on stage. His eyes didn't search for applause. Instead, they drifted upward, slowly scanning the sky. The young fans stopped cheering. The older ones quietly wiped away tears. One elderly musician in the crowd whispered, "I used to shake when I played beside Wilson Pickett. Today, I shook because his son stood there like a wild spirit reborn." Wilson Pickett Jr. needed no speech. He was the message. A living echo of rebellion, proof that some legacies don't fade, they smolder. He reminds us that beauty doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real and reckless enough to wake up the parts of our hearts we thought were already cold. Otis Redding III. Otis Redding III is a man of quiet power. His father once silenced the world with a single song. Otis Redding III did something just as profound, without making a sound. He never needed volume to command attention. His calm presence, gentle smile, and eyes that truly listened drew people in, not just to meet him, but to remain with him. A strong face. A steady posture. A voice that carried warmth instead of force. He was the kind of man who made you feel safe with nothing more than a nod. Otis III is an artist who has traveled the country honoring his father's legacy, carrying forward a message of love through music. But his most unforgettable moment came in 2015, when he visited a high school in Macon, Georgia, his father's hometown, to speak to students. When he entered the classroom, no one stood. No one applauded. The room fell into an unsettling silence. He spoke very little. Later, one student recalled, "But the way he looked at me, those eyes, exactly like the famous photo of Otis Redding, I felt seen. I felt heard." Otis Redding III never tried to imitate his father. He didn't need to. He was a quiet continuation, soft, yet deeply powerful. He lived like a slow, sorrowful blues melody, gentle, aching, and beautiful, warming the hearts of those who once loved soul music. And sometimes, a person doesn't need to shake the world to be remembered. Sometimes, slowing a single heartbeat is enough to last forever. David Ruffin Jr. David Ruffin Jr. is the heir to a gaze that once melted stages. Tall and slender, with a sharp nose and eyes so cold they feel like a frozen ballad, he carries a quiet intensity that stops people mid-breath. As the son of the Temptations' legendary frontman, David Jr. inherited more than a famous name. He carries a trace of wildness, excess, and mystery that doesn't just attract women, it unsettles them. A singer and music producer, he has worked with Snoop Dogg and several West Coast artists, including appearances at a memorial show honoring his father. That night, David Jr. didn't sing. He simply stepped into the light and read his words. Yet the moment the spotlight hit his calm, distant face, etched with memory, an elderly woman in the audience began to cry. She later said, "I loved David Ruffin, but his son makes me feel like I've met my first love all over again." The beauty of David Ruffin Jr. isn't something you admire, it's something you remember. Like a soul that slows your heartbeat. He makes you believe that a look, deep enough, can hold onto your soul for a lifetime. Curtis Mayfield Jr. Curtis Mayfield Jr. is the kind of quiet presence you can't look away from. He isn't loud or rebellious, and that's exactly why he draws you in, like a thin ribbon of smoke drifting through a smooth jazz record. With his slender frame, gentle features, and steady, thoughtful eyes, he carries a cool, understated beauty the modern world is slowly forgetting. An independent producer, Curtis Jr. devotes his craft to soundtracks for documentaries and community theater, shaping emotion without demanding attention. At a charity concert in Chicago, his name never appeared on the poster. Yet as he stood silently backstage, women in the crowd kept whispering, "Who is that?" One middle-aged woman approached him, spoke with him for barely 5 minutes, and later wrote a blog post calling him the soft light at the end of the day, the kind that makes me believe real artists are still alive. Curtis Jr. doesn't need the spotlight. He's the kind of beauty that leaves you wordless, the kind you only discover in silence, and once you do, you never forget. Bobby Womack Jr. Bobby Womack Jr. carries the kind of weathered face that seems to ask life's hardest questions without ever speaking. He is a blend of rebellion and lived-in wisdom. Not conventionally handsome, yet his wary eyes and loose, unbothered presence make it impossible to look away. He once played guitar in small, forgotten bands, drifting from place to place, known as the kind of man you'd confess all your worst mistakes to just so you could hear him laugh them off. One night in a dim Memphis bar, sitting alone in the corner with nothing but a glass of whiskey, a woman walked up and said, "I don't know who you are, but if this were a movie, you'd be the main character." When people later learned he was Bobby Womack's son, they were surprised, but they also agreed he had a quiet magnetism of his own, one that didn't need fame to exist. Bobby Jr. stands as proof that real beauty is born from flaws, and that we are drawn most to those who know failure, understand sorrow, and still move through life with undeniable allure. Donny Hathaway Jr. Donny Hathaway Jr. is the man with the sad eyes that quietly break your heart. He inherited his father's gaze, a look that feels like an unfinished love song still searching for its final note. There's a soft melancholy in his face, both seductive and restrained, making you want to ask him everything and touch nothing at all. He has found his own path in theater and has appeared in several memorial performances honoring Donny Hathaway. At a tribute concert for his father in New York, he stepped onto the stage without spotlights. There was only a hushed piano and those speaking eyes. An elderly woman in the audience later said that the moment he opened his mouth, the room fell under a spell. No one blinked. "For a second, I thought I was seeing Donny again," she said, "but then I realized his son's eyes carried even more pain than his father's voice ever did." Donny Jr. never reached for attention. Instead, it was his quiet presence that made the audience listen with their entire hearts. He stood as a living embodiment of subtle beauty, emotional depth, and raw humanity, a gentle melody carrying forward the most precious things his father left behind. Lenny Williams Jr. Lenny Williams Jr., the kind of smile that doesn't just catch your eye, but lingers in your memory. With a radiant face and a warmth that fills any room, he's a familiar presence at Oakland arts events, often helping bring community gatherings to life. Yet what people remember most isn't what he does, it's how he makes them feel. At a 2019 charity gala, Lenny Jr. stepped into the lobby in a light gray suit, his shirt open at the collar, effortless and calm. When he flashed a smile at a young server, a group of female volunteers burst into cheers without even realizing it. "He's not just handsome," one of them said. "He's like your first boyfriend, the one you never really forget." Lenny Jr. doesn't need fame or a spotlight. He exists as a living, breathing memory, soft, sincere, and strangely comforting. His beauty isn't loud. It's the kind that makes you smile simply because you remember a fleeting moment. He reminds people to be gentler, to love life a little more, to open their hearts. As if every smile he gives has the power to warm even the coldest past. Al Green Jr., a man who felt like a love song brought to life. With his naturally tousled hair and a face steeped in quiet romance, he looked as though he'd wandered out of an old art house film. He never chose music as his path, yet wherever he went, people felt as if they were standing inside a soft soul melody. At a photo exhibition honoring Motown legends, Al Jr. paused before a portrait of his father. An elderly woman stepped closer and gently asked, "Who are you?" He smiled, calm and unassuming, and said, "I'm part of his memory." Her eyes filled with tears. "I used to love your father," she whispered, "but you make me want to believe in love again." Al Jr. never needed grand speeches or dramatic gestures. He carried a quiet grace, the kind that draws the soul in without trying. A nod, a glance, was enough to awaken an entire season of feeling. Sometimes, living beautifully simply means reminding someone that love can still return, unexpected, gentle, and real, just like the look in his eyes. When you see a man radiating charm and depth, remember that he may have fought hard just to be himself. No one should be confined by appearances or by bloodlines. We need more love and less judgment, because everyone is doing their best to live truthfully, in their own way. Teddy Pendergrass II. The voice of a legacy. Teddy Pendergrass II doesn't chase attention, he commands it without trying. Tall, poised, carrying a quiet masculine presence, he naturally turns heads when he enters a room. But what truly stops people is his voice. Resonant. A voice that seems to settle the air itself. He is not a singer. Instead, Teddy II has found his calling as a motivational speaker and life coach, appearing regularly at major conferences focused on healing, resilience, and overcoming loss. In 2018, at a talk on Black cultural heritage, he stepped onto the stage in complete silence. No music, no effects, just a microphone, and that voice. When he spoke his first sentence, the room froze. An elderly woman in the audience pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, "That's the same voice I heard on tape 30 years ago, only deeper now. More present." A television producer in attendance later said, "If you loved Teddy the Elder for his fire, you'll love Teddy the Younger for his quiet strength." Teddy Pendergrass II reminds us that real beauty isn't found in spectacle, but in steady presence. His voice doesn't shout, it whispers with purpose. Soft as wind, yet powerful enough to move hearts and reshape a generation. Keith Washington Jr. is a living portrait. With a refined build, a luminous face, and a smile that feels lifted straight from a classic 90s Boyz II Men music video, he carries an undeniable presence. Unlike his father, he didn't chase a career in music. Instead, he carved his own lane, finding success in fashion and commercial photography. But what truly holds people's attention isn't his resume, it's his aura. Keith Jr. embodies a rare mix of old-school elegance and quiet maturity, something almost forgotten in today's world. During a photo shoot for a Black-owned fashion brand, Keith Jr. entered the studio wearing an ivory white suit and a vintage timepiece. The room shifted instantly. A female model, someone who had worked alongside countless A-list artists, whispered in disbelief, "I've never seen anyone calm a room just by walking in." He didn't even have to pose. Every look he gave had its own rhythm. The photographer made an unusual choice that day. He didn't adjust the lighting at all. He didn't need to. The most beautiful light was already coming from Keith's face. Keith Washington Jr. needs no explanation. His beauty lives in his stillness, his restraint, and the dreamlike distance he keeps from the world. He is living proof that sometimes you don't need a chart-topping love song to be unforgettable. just a single, quiet moment that lingers forever. These sons of R&B legends didn't just inherit their father's striking looks. They inherited their presence, their history, their soul, the intangible elements that define true, timeless beauty. Thank you for staying until the end to witness a generation shaped by both glory and depth in musical history. Like the video if you believe beauty can be inherited. Share it to spread the feeling. And don't forget to comment on which one you admire most.